Hello, everyone. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in HighLoad here in Moscow. It's an amazing conference. This is my first time here. So my name's Andrew Boag. I'm from Catalyst in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. And this is a presentation about AWS cost management, Amazon, AWS, our experiences and strategies with this in our business. So a little bit about the company that I'm a shareholder in, the company that I work for, Catalyst, just to give you some context about who we are. We're originally from New Zealand. I'm a New Zealander. We've been around for about 25 years. We have offices in New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. We're essentially software developers, consultants, and we do managed services for various applications, but we're all about free and open source technologies, right? So you'll see some of the technologies we work with there. Drupal, Moodle, Alfresco, obviously Linux. We also have an OpenStack cluster. I myself am the managing director, excuse me. I'm the managing director of Catalyst Australia. My background is technical. I was once a software developer and infrastructure engineer. Now I'm just now I manage people and projects and problems, not code anymore. And my background also includes, coincidentally, some time here in Russia, in fact. I lived in Moscow from 1998 until 2005. Но сегодняшняя презентация будет на английском языке, так как после 20 часа на самолете прилетел вчера, я еле на своем родном языке могу сейчас говорить. So we'll do it in English. It will be much more interesting that way. So who is this for, this talk? As part of the discussions that I had with the organizers of HighLoad, based on the title of the presentation, they wanted to know if this talk would be very attached to Amazon, to AWS especially, or more generally applicable to other cloud technologies. I see from walking around here today that Mail.ru and Yandex have a cloud platform. That's great. It's great that there's more competition in the market. And that's something that I very much took on board. And while some of, and I was open about this, while some of this stuff is quite connected to AWS, because that is our experience set, and I'll talk about that a wee bit, there are many things here that are very generic to any cloud platform. So this is aiming to help people, engineers, software developers, managers, financial controllers, because it's a collaborative exercise to control spending on cloud platforms. So just a little bit about us, Catalyst and AWS. So we've been working with AWS since about 2010 with some services that we put onto platforms in 2010. AWS launched in Australia in 2012, so 6 years ago, and that was a game changer for Australia. That massively disrupted the market. Australia had quite a controlled and expensive infrastructure market. It wasn't like Europe or the States, where it was quite expensive and complicated to, put data. Traffic was very expensive, these sorts of things. And AWS changed all of that, and it has had a huge market impact in Australia. AWS has different effects in different regions. It isn't always quite such a big deal from what I understand. I know in Europe it's a bit different, but in Australia they've really made a huge impact, and people equate cloud with Amazon, right? Our core experience is about building and running and taking responsibility for web applications, large web applications that do various things. But these are big applications. We build them in cloud-native architectures. We have 24/7 responsibility for them. They have high load demands. We have a very big AWS bill every month, which gives me personal capability to understand the importance of reducing the bill. I was deciding whether or not I would say how much our bill is, but let's say it's 5 figures in US dollars every month, and the first number isn't a 1. And in terms of, that's every month. So, and in terms of some of the clients that we work with, some of our clients have AWS bills of over $100,000 a month, right? So that's a lot of money. For me, that's not a small spend. And look, but saying that, we think Amazon's really great. And when we first started using it, it really allowed us to do all sorts of new things. As cloud technologies do, it solved all sorts of problems, but it also presents new challenges. So here are also some of the many tool sets that we've used in Amazon. And look, there are many parts of the offering that we've had nothing to do with. It's broad, it's very, very powerful. There's all sorts of services and tools. And but I mean, you have to be careful with praise about your own team. But we've done a lot of good work with your sort of orchestration and CI/CD pipelines and various re-architectures and high availability and all these sorts of things that are very important. So before we talk about the way in which cloud pricing works and managing spend, actually, I was going to ask, who here has some sort of workload running on AWS? I understand it's a bit different here in Russia for AWS, but that's interesting. Thank you. So just before the cloud, right, before AWS, and this is probably still quite relevant here, before we had the ability to use infrastructure as a service, we lived in a world where, that's not a very good photo, that's meant to be of a server in a rack. Doesn't come out very good here, but before that, the provisioning of capacity for your web applications was done in a way where you designed how many web servers you need, how many applications you need, how much storage you need, how much data you needed every month, these sorts of things, and you either rented this hardware off a provider or you bought the hardware yourself and you put it into a rack and you managed all those things. And that's fine, and that's still being done a lot, right? But the thing about that model is that it meant the decision around spending was done like a project. You came together with a proposal, you maybe asked various providers how much these things would cost, and you got some numbers and you talked about it with your spending team and you made some decisions and you knew that's how much I'm buying. And the monthly cost, whether that was renting infrastructure or co-location or whatever, was reasonably fixed, right? Like it was going to be $4,000 a month or $50 a month or $20,000 a month, but it didn't fluctuate that much generally, right? Okay, you might get charged for traffic and stuff, but you more or less knew how much you were going to spend, right? And that's quite an important distinction in the way these decisions got made. Now obviously with cloud situation, it's very different, right? And like one of the things I talk about here is estimating and prognosing cost is really quite difficult. It's easy to be optimistic, and that's quite a challenge for many parts of the business where before they had a cost, they had a budget, and now that's changed. So why? Why do we want to manage our cloud spend? Why do we need to manage our cloud spend? Well, of course, to save money, right? But another way of looking at it for my business personally is that my monthly expenses, I mean, I have my business has staff and rent in terms of the outgoings and the incomings. I have staff and I have rent and I have various expenses. The main expenses is staff, then followed by things like rent for our offices. We have an office in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. And then one of the other big items is my cloud infrastructure bill, right? So in terms of the actual effect that I can have in terms of reducing expenses, it is the expense in my monthly costs that I have the most control over, right? Like if I put effort into that, I can reduce it. And if I ignore that cost, there's only one direction it will go, ladies and gentlemen, north, right? That's what happens to cloud spending bills, almost without exception. So you have to, so it is the bill that we are able to impact on the most, so hence it is very worthy of attention. So I'm breaking this talk into sort of a couple of different sections. Experiences, which is things that knowledge that we've acquired, and some challenges, as well as some strategies that might be useful, okay? So the first experience, no great surprise, with all cloud platforms, it's really, really easy to spend money, right? So with no qualifications, any one of you can go and open yourself an account, put a credit card in there, and start spending money, right? And everything you do and everything you turn on has a bill associated with it, has a price point. And that is a constant challenge, right? that is a constant challenge with embracing the flexibility of the cloud, right? Because the things that we really loved in the beginning was this flexibility. As systems architects and as people who are designing architectures, if we want more servers, we get more servers. If we need a bigger database, we get a bigger database. If we want more storage, take it. If you need it, take it, right? We're able to do all sorts of really great things that wasn't so easy before. But for all those things, there is a cost. And there's some it's interesting to see, how easy it is to spend dollars. If you come and talk to me, I'll tell you some funny stories about things I've done, which I won't admit to on video, where we've got very big bills and thankfully resolved these things. Yeah, that image didn't come through very well, unfortunately. Anyway. So the other experience as well is change has a cost, right? Traditionally in the IT infrastructure world and the way in which software products were designed and sold is that they use the term vendor lock-in. Everyone's heard of the term vendor lock-in, right? Organizations, some of your more traditional providers like Microsoft and Oracle and these places were sometimes accused of locking in their clients with the way that their platforms didn't really allow, it was hard to move away from them. Now I think that the paradigm has shifted slightly in that essentially when you have a large architecture sitting in a data center or in a cloud, if you want to improve that architecture or change it meaningfully, that will have a cost. Obviously it has a cost because you might be spending time on it, but many times we have got really excited about rebuilding our current, a big architecture, a big platform to do it better, right? We all understand how excited we all get, engineers about making things better and using new technologies and some new tools. Great example is everything to do with containers, right? So, everyone's sort of looking at all these different container management platforms like Kubernetes or Kubernetes really seems to be the only one you would use in all honesty now, but there, ECS or Swarm or Marathon, there were very many of them, and we looked at that and thought, hey, wow, this is really interesting. Like there's going to be some really good things we can do with this, and this will solve some problems, and this will mean we can do this, and hey, let's go and let's rebuild everything using containers. And that's a really great idea, and you can have a meeting about it, and you can take this big application you've got sitting over here that processes 1 million page views a day, and you can re-architect it over here, separately putting it all into Kubernetes. But we all have a habit of being optimistic about how long that's going to take us to do. And we're all very busy looking after our clients and getting on with this project and that project. So instead of taking 2 weeks, it takes 8 weeks. And this stuff is sort of running there, and we get a bill for that, right? So this is a constant factor, and you've got to accept that with change, there is cost. Forecasting reality, there's all sorts of calculators you can use, and they're good, they're useful, and the more you use them and the more you think about them, the better. But it is a challenging one. It is, in reality, we've found it quite challenging. Look, knowledge is power, like as you guys like to say, uchica. The more you know, these systems are complicated, right? Like all of this, Amazon is what we've had a lot to do, and the pricing model is complicated. It is very complicated. Print out a big Amazon bill, and it will go like 60 pages, right? And like you can just, how many IOPS do I need for this? And you just look at some of these things, and I'm reasonably knowledgeable about infrastructure. But what's that? Like, what's this thing here? What's this line item with all this money? So you need to know about how these things work in order to make decisions about reducing your spend. Our operations lead is a very, very, very smart individual, and he spends a lot of time. He's broadly skilled as both a developer and a sysadmin and a DevOps engineer, and he understands a lot about the pricing model. And it's changing. It's changing all the time. And if you need to understand how those changes affect you and how you can do better. And without doing that, you will be constrained in your ability to restrict these things. Certification and training is a good thing as well, if you've got time. One other thing is the cloud isn't always cheaper, right? There are reasons where you can get more value out of more traditional in data center setups, and this is certainly the case in many parts of the world. It depends, right? Of course, there are times when cloud is definitely the best option, and there are a lot of things we wouldn't do anywhere but in a cloud platform at the moment. But we recently moved sort of like an archival storage system that was really just a big shared disk, with all sorts of automation around it. And putting that inside of a cloud platform was quite expensive, whereas we were able to put this inside a data center model because the cost of data centers has dropped heavily as well over the last few years, and save between $3,000 and $4,000 a month, right? So you've got to understand what you're trying to do, and this is also very much. It's also very easy to, if you don't architect for the cloud, doing what we call in Australia a lift and shift, and just take essentially a VMware architecture and just pick it up and put it into some sort of cloud platform in exactly the same way, you often will end up spending more and really not having any real benefits, but it's in the cloud. So do think about your use case and have an experiment. The other really ongoing interesting problem is responsibility as an organization, right? So in the example I gave earlier around let's get all excited and let's talk about how we're going to re-architect our platform based on a legacy sort of cloud platform to Kubernetes, right? We'll get all excited and well, yeah, this Kubernetes thing, it's great, it's awesome, I can see all these, we're going to be able to do this and this and this. And one guy's go, I'll build this and I'll start on the continuous integration pipelines and all this great. And we'll all go, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then I'll say, whose job in here is it to stop me spending $20,000 on this? And then we have a phrase in English called the silence is deafening. I think the best translation is zvinyasha tishina. Right? Like no one says anything. They're like waiting for someone else to put their hand up, right? And I understand because that's not the fun part. That's not the cool part, right? So who was responsible in an organization to keep the bill down? Who was the one who was rewarded for it going down and not punished, but who has some responsibility to stop it going up? In our case, it's the business owners because we are motivated. For the very reasons I said at the beginning, that is the cost we have the most control over, right? So we are the ones who go in there and we play this game. I mean, we improve various things and use new strategies, but every now and again we go in and do this whack-a-mole thing and just start smashing it down. But we're in a pretty good place at the moment, but it requires vigilance. But yeah, just a bit more actually about that, about the responsibility. It's not just it's not the sysadmin's responsibility, and it's not the project manager's responsibility, and it's not the financial controller's responsibility. It has to be together because it's not under anyone's complete influence, not under any one person's complete control, right? So it's an interesting one, and I think it needs collaboration. People need to be talking to each other. But it's a really, in large organizations that we've consulted with around trying to reduce their AWS spend, that's often the problem we run into. We walk into a room and we say, what's all this? They give us access to their AWS, and what's this? And they go, I don't know. I go, okay, can we turn it off? And they go, I don't know. And you go, okay, well, what's Dev 7? Or, what's CI/CD prod or what? And they go, that was that guy. He came in a while ago and he did it. And it's like, okay, great, yeah. So can we turn it off? And they go, no, I don't know. We'll have to have another meeting. And these things go on and on and on. And like, it's very easy to spend, once again, that's costing them every month. So the first strategy is turn stuff off. Turn stuff off. Go in there and press off. Don't leave it running. Get stuff off. If you don't need it, turn it off. This is a challenge. As I say, a sysadmin does not equal an accountant, right? They are very different creatures. They have different ideas about what's fun. They don't hang out on the weekend together. They are very different roles, right? And it doesn't happen by itself. Sorry. Another strategy is ask questions, right? So that's what we do. I look at our spend, and I look at our spend when we have our meetings, and I go, what's this? What's this? Why are we spending that? And it's not an aggressive question. It's not trying to say that someone's to blame. It's like, let's talk about it, guys. Like if someone goes, yeah, I don't know what that is. Yeah, that's pretty big, isn't it? Like we're spending all this money on something. I'm like, yeah, maybe that was from that other project that we're not doing anymore. It's like, well, maybe we should turn it off then, Maybe we should get rid of it. And that's given us, doing that has been what's allowed us to meaningfully, over periods of time, knock 30 to 40% off our spend. Right? Which I think is pretty good. I'm still hungry though, I want to reduce it even more, but we've made meaningful improvements, and I'll talk about some of these things in a minute. So the other strategy is architect for the cloud. So cattle, not pets. Are you familiar with that phrase, cattle, not pets? Yes? No? So I assume no. So there's probably a different way of saying it. It's this idea that in a cloud architecture, in your legacy architecture, pets are like dogs and cats, right? They have names. Cattle is like, what should be, skot? Like, you know, things in the field that go bar or moo, and like there's 10 of them. They don't all have names. You know, if one dies, you go, okay, whatever. They're livestock, okay? Whereas pets, they're your friends, you give them names. If they get sick, you take them to the vet and you fix them and you spend money on them, right? So the legacy architecture in a data center, 10 servers in a rack, they all had names in them. If a disk broke, you took the disk out and you put a new one in and like you fixed it. That's a pet, right? Whereas a cattle in the cloud architecture, like if you think it the way like an auto-scale group works inside any cloud platform, and there'll be 5 front ends, and sometimes there'll be 10 front ends, and sometimes there'll be 2 front ends, and they're all the same, and they're all reacting to load and activity, and you can just kill one of those, right? So if one of them is unhappy or unhealthy, you just kill it. You just turn it off, blow it away, and another one comes along, right? So that's the way, that was sort of a big part of the architectural attitude to the way in which you should build cloud applications. The containers have sort of changed that a wee bit, but that was the way in which people thought these things should be built, as well as some other principles. And taking, as I said, a VMware infrastructure, which is still more pets. VMware generally, the way I see it used, is generally more of a pets approach. You know, there's names and there's all this tools around reliability for these machines. And just lifting that up and going and putting it into AWS and calling things the same is not the way you're supposed to do it. But it's still done very, very often. And we call that a lift and shift. And that's quite a big business model for many organizations in Australia. But usually, it's not the way you're supposed to be used AWS or any cloud platform. Reserved instances. I'll explain what reserved instances are. Excuse me. If you didn't know, it's one of the original cost management sort of tools. Reserved instances mean that you can, a VM in AWS is called an EC2, right? That's a VM, essentially, compute. And you can say, if I'm committing to using this compute size for 1 year, then I get a discount of about, there's various models, and you can commit to more or less and commit for longer, and there's various complexities there. But essentially, if you commit to using something for a year, then you can get between 30% discount, depending on the service. So if you understand that your baseline is going to involve databases of certain sizes, servers of certain sizes, you can commit to using those and make savings, right? But they are a little scary. They are a little scary. The first time I took, I tell you what, when we committed to a reserved instance for a database, an RDS, when we're starting out with AWS, like it was a big database too, you know, it was going to cost, I think to pay, because you have to pay up front as well, you have to pay in advance. And it was like $15,000 or something to pay it. And we're all sort of sitting there going, who wants to press the button, you know? Who wants to be the one who chooses it? I'm going, you can do it, you can do it, it's okay, you can do it. And we're also sitting there, because if you get it wrong, then there's no refunds. But in reality, if you called up AWS and said, oh, we got the wrong size, please help, they would probably let you change it. But 2 weeks later, if you're using it, that's it, you've bought it, right? So that's it, you've committed to using it. So it's a little bit scary. And if you get it wrong, then you can conceivably actually end up spending more. But it's certainly something you want to use. And it's something we use a lot, but it is a bit of a spend money to save money approach. But certainly, we use it heavily. So here's a bit more of a radical thought, right? This goes into, architecting for the cloud. Block storage is not the way forward. NFS, Gluster, EFS, any of these sort of network shared file systems for your data is just not the way you want to be going, right? Like, yes, they will always exist, but there are all sorts of problems that really that cloud platforms allow us to create by making hugely scalable, horizontally scalable file systems, right? Yes, you can do it. Like, we've used Gluster very heavily, and EFS, and NFS before that, and done some quite interesting things with it. And I've actually done presentations about our experience with Gluster FS. And it's great. It solves the problem in some ways, but it creates new problems. And large block devices, or things that look like block devices, become more and more problematic the bigger they get, right? There's just more and more management, capacity management, cost. You start doing things. I mean, this might seem radical to some of you that I'm saying this because you think, no, put it on disk, it's all good, right? But in some ways, you still have to do that. But there are, snapshotting file systems is a really good way to store lots of things you don't need and spend lots of money, right? So you want to start thinking more and more about trying not to use block storage. And that's challenging. But we've managed to do various initiatives using, surprise, surprise, object storage. So of course, use object storage, right? I mean, it's one of the first things that came along in the cloud platform is just using objects to store things. Easy, right? But actually, migrating many legacy applications to really embracing object storage can be quite challenging because it's not the same as just writing on a file system, right? There's a couple of things you have to deal with, like object storage, this whole idea of eventual consistency, where you write a file and you may not get it back straight away. You probably will, but you may not. And the way your application deals with that, and there's some things that object storage doesn't work very well for, like small files that change a lot. So there's some effort involved, but once you've done that, S3 or a similar, Google's got one, Microsoft's got one, I'm sure Yandex has got one, everyone's got one. Everyone's got an object storage solution. Once you embrace that, there are some really good things, right? So obviously, you never have to do capacity management, right? You never have to grow a file system. You never have to add more disks. You never have to do any of that sort of stuff. You can share your objects between production and non-production environments. That's super handy, right? So you can, instead of having this production environment with a big 2 terabytes of disk and having to replicate that across for your UAT and staging and this, you just reuse the objects with a read-only model, right? So it means all that stuff is really handy. And just inherently, when you write an object, you store more metadata around it. Like if you snapshot file systems, like for example, if you're snapshotting the file system of some application data, and you just keep one every week, and like standard week, month, and you go back and you go, okay, if I look at 6 months ago, I've got 200, I've got 2 terabytes or whatever, snapshotted from 6 months ago. Do I need all of that 2 terabytes really, like from 6 months ago? Probably not, right? There are things on there that you need, but there are plenty of things you don't need, right? There are plenty of things that you don't need to keep from that long ago, right? Whereas object storage sort of forces you to be more specific and discrete. But it's a bit radical, and we've had some challenges with migration, but it is the way forward. Backup and retention. Interestingly enough, so who here works in an organization where you still use tapes for backup? No one will admit to it. I do. Not in my part of the business, but we do use tapes. The thing about backup and retention policy, and it is a lot of it. Certainly, I mean, I don't know how it is in the Russian market, so I can only speak for myself and our own experience. A lot of the rules around backup were decided by people like your real stereotypical old school like sysadmin guy with a big beard who was like in the back who's got his tape, and he was the one who decided that we kept month, week. It wasn't the business, it was him. He was we've got 5 boxes of tapes, and we've got this much storage, and that's how we're going to do it, right? That was who made the decision, right? It wasn't because they decided that you have to keep 6 months based on those rules. It was just sort of a policy that someone technical made, right? And when you start using more dynamic cloud platforms to do backup, you've got to rethink how you're going to store things, how much you need to store things, and now in the modern world, which stuff you're even allowed to store, right? With things like GDPR, and I believe there are Russian initiatives. There's a presentation I want to go to actually here at I think it's later today, about some of the legal stuff going on here. There are really new considerations that you need to think about. Are you spending, because you are spending money on backup and archive and data retention the right way? Right? And that's more than just a sysadmin going, sure, we got backups, no problem, because you can end up just wasting lots of money. And sometimes not actually storing what you need to store. So it's worth reviewing and thinking about it and understanding how much you're spending and how much it costs. One bit of advice that is pretty standard, and I'm sure if you've had anything to do with cloud platforms you've heard, is using tags for infrastructure. Tags and separation around accounts. It's very easy, especially when you begin, to start like letting people loose and firing up all this infrastructure. And then when you get your bill, you're like, oh, right, how much of our storage is for this thing and how much application is for this thing? And it's quite difficult to sometimes diagnose. But tags, I mean, they're just they're a bit of metadata you can attach to services running. And I'm sure all the cloud platforms support them. But certainly they're very big in AWS, is it gives you more visibility of, like, interesting question, right? You should be able to answer if someone says to you, how much money are we spending on production versus non-production, right? How much infrastructure spend? Because often you're spending, I know organizations that are spending 3 times as much in their cloud spend in their non-production workloads, because all this automated unit testing and CI/CD and all this magic, amazing stuff, right? So they're spending far more now on non-production stuff than they are in production. But if you don't have things tagged or separated, sometimes that's sort of quite hard to understand, right? And you really do want to be able to understand things like that. You want to say, well, how much is this application using? And things like traffic as well. The other ones is use separate accounts. That has its challenges, like open a different account for different projects. That's not perfect, but it's something to consider. You've got to be careful with just throwing lots of stuff into one account. It's very easy for it to get confusing. Another one is be aware, like RDS is amazing, like the flexibility, the relational database, you know, MySQL, Postgres, Aurora, these ones, the flexibility that's given us to do some things around application management is amazing, right? And it's saved us. But you can turn on some big databases, right? You can turn on some big databases. They only cost $8 a minute. No, sorry, $8 an hour. But there are a lot of hours in a month, you know. There are a lot of hours in a month. And if you put on a read replica and high availability and all this sort of stuff, like, you can spend a lot. You can spend a lot indeed. So it's something to be aware of, right? And it's something to look at, because relational databases are not the only way of storing things, you know. And like there are efficiencies you can you can load test and profile a lot better using a cloud platform and really diagnose what you need. And you know, you can think about things more, but just be careful continuously turning them up when you need more capacity, because you know there can be costs obviously involved. You know, it wouldn't be reasonable to not mention some of the SaaS offerings around cloud reduction. I mean, I'm not going to promote any of these ones in any particular. I've never really encountered a magical setup. I mean, things like Cloud Checker. This is not an authoritative list, right? You have to review, you have to mention these things. There are various reporting tools. Amazon has some. You know, Cloud Check, all these things, and they're great. They're very good. You should be at least trying them out, but they don't do it for you, right? Like, they will give you a report and go, look, hey, there's a graph. Like, we're spending more or we're spending less, and everyone go, look, a graph. Great, but you got to do something, ladies and gentlemen. You have to actually you have to give yourself targets and make the graph go down or whatever. So they're worth using. I mean, we found them interesting, but once again, the responsibility still is ours. One that's worth looking at is Spotinst. I'm not going to go too much. That's sort of related to containers. It's quite an interesting one. Another trick, actually, that we discovered late in the game, look, this isn't huge, but in many parts of the world, in Australia, we still pay for AWS services in American dollars. Now, that's quite rare. I mean, I know here in Russia there's a lot of, I mean, everything's in rubles now, but there's people are very used to different currencies and all that stuff. But with us, everything's in Australian dollars, right? You don't really buy anything that's not in Australian dollars. The local AWS, and I'm talking about stuff in Sydney, is still charged in US dollars. So that's got implications around currency changes, right? Like when the course goes up or down, like it costs us more. So one of the things we did was just, you know, you can buy money, you can use, you know, better foreign exchange means, and you can save 5% or something, right? If you're a bit smarter about that, you can save money there as opposed to just using a credit card. If you've got a good big bill, don't use a credit card, right? Because they don't give you very good exchange rates. And there's plenty of offerings, and everyone just Forex and Google, right? And you obviously have the option, if you want, of doing some level of currency hedging to reduce risk. That's up to you. You know, you may win, you may lose, but it's something worth considering at the very least. It's not something we've done, but we've talked about it. The other strategy is make targets, right? So look at that bill and go, so my approach is I print the bill out, I walk into a room, I scream into a pillow, I like shake my head, I calm down, I go, right, what are we going to do? What's our target? I want to knock you know, I want 20% off this. We should be aiming to make it this number in 3 months' time. Let's make a concrete goal, right? Like we may not make it, right? It's challenging. And I'm also sometimes the one who makes the decision to just turn things on. Just turn it on, keep it running, just turn it up. We don't want to risk something. So I'm also that person as well. But, you know, you've got to have goals. It doesn't happen automatically. And it gives you, it's also sometimes addresses the challenges around responsibility that I talked about, right? So everyone is aware that you have this goal and that, you know, guess what, guys? Like, we do have to be a bit careful about our spend because it is a broad responsibility. You want to enable people to use the tool. I mean, one more thing I'm going to mention, because it's relevant. I mean, it's not so much in a cost-saving sort of thing, but Docker and all of the tools around that, or containers and all the tools around that, has certainly positive potential to affect the way we use cloud infrastructure, right? Like, it's complicated. It isn't. So I wouldn't throw around any kind of statements like it's cheaper, but there are ways in which, done well, and you know, I can attest to this because we have done this, but you know, it wasn't quite the journey we thought. There are ways in which you will be able to make better use of your compute resources using, you know, something like Kubernetes or ECS. We actually used ECS in our solution because when we did it, which was only a year or year and a half ago, it just looked better to us than Kubernetes, right? But now if we did it, we'd use Kubernetes. But it was quite a journey. We've blogged quite a lot about it. Certainly it's given us more, we're getting more use out of the CPU we're paying for, right? But it's not without its challenges, and it's a big change, right? Like, it is not just a long weekend, hey, cool, I'll just move it over to Kubernetes or whatever. No. But it's it is, and it does give you more flexibility in terms of, you know, the platforms you use. You could conceivably, I think that it really does give you the ability to move between cloud platforms in a way that nothing else ever has, you know? Like, taking a big workload out of AWS and putting it into Google or Amazon, into Microsoft, I mean, it's a big deal, you know, like you will end up rebuilding some things, it's like, and you end up spending all this time and money and you go, well, you know, I mean, I don't know what problem we were solving, unless, you know, that was sort of an enterprise decision. Whereas with Kubernetes, in theory, and I'm going to the Kubernetes conference next week, actually. This is why I managed to tie in Moscow, because the conference is next week in Shanghai. And it really is, you have the ability to, in theory, you know, take this workload on one platform and just move it over to another, right? In theory. I think there's probably going to be some challenges. But it certainly seems like that will allow you to do some clever things with the way you manage cost. So it's something to consider. I think I've finished now. I don't think I have anything else to talk about. But I mean, some of those topics I could probably talk more about, but I was quite focused on keeping it broad and general and having enough time for questions, which we do. So please, do we have any questions? Thank you. No questions? Please. На русском можно, если хотите. Я скорее отвечу на английском языке, но...
When I was using AWS, the main question for me was what strategic should I choose? Because when you know, like when you use EC2, you have two main strategies. First one is to use small containers with, for example, one or two virtual cores. And second strategic is to use huge machines with a lot of cores. And the question is, how is better? Because the prices is quite similar. I mean, like the huge machine with a lot of cores cost relatively the same amount of money than the equal cores, but distributed by with a lot of machines on EC2. Which is better, run a lot of small machines or one big? Do you test it, maybe?
So I think it depends, right? So there are people who could answer this question better than me, but I would say whenever you're designing, if you're doing it really properly, whenever you're designing architectures for an application inside a cloud platform, part of that design validation needs to be load and performance testing, right? So that will answer your question. You know, which one's better? Well, one performs better for the same cost. One gives us more tolerance to failure. One gives us faster page load times, right? That will answer your question, and it depends. You know, all of these things, we've had all sorts of discussions about, you know, which CPU size we use, which one gives us better, and it's all theory until you have metrics that allow you to prove something. And that's one of the real strengths, one of the things we really liked about cloud platforms is you can do load testing in a way you never could before, because you can stand up a whole copy of your production infrastructure and throw a load test at it for 8 hours. I mean, you have to pay for it, but you can throw a full crazy load test at it, essentially a denial of service attack, for 8 hours, see what happens, got all this metrics around it, and then make a decision. So, you know, the answer is validate your architectures, right? And there's various ways to do that. But don't just go, looks good, want to do it, I want to do it this way because I'm really smart. I'm not, you know, that's what, sometimes we as IT people are quite difficult and think our ideas is better than everyone else's. I agree, I'll put my hand up to having done that in the past, but the best way is to validate things by metrics.
Thank you. Several months ago, we were launching cloud functions on Google cloud hosting, and we faced the problem that for some reasons, if your cloud function doesn't work correctly, it cannot access networks or something else. It just starts creating new instances of cloud functions, taking money and so on. So these cloud functions are primarily used for making like workers, and I've started to think 10 times before I use these cloud functions, Lambda and so on, and I'm looking more to making some kind of services for it on basic servers. What do you think about this?
Sounds great. No. So in order to avoid unexpected circumstances, right, our approach, and this is not different to standard application management, is if you have something go wrong and it frightens you, like in this case, hey, I'm going to get a big bill, is you create a monitoring test for it, you know, a Nagios, Zabbix, whatever your tool sets, CloudWatch, whatever, you monitor for it and you proactively test for it, right? That's what we, in an always green approach, right? So a test that should never fail, right? In your case, if I understood correctly, it was creating lots of workers, and you don't want 5,000 workers running because, hey, I only need 2, right? So you don't want these 5,000 workers working. So you would, you know, make some tests with, say, if there is more than 10 workers running for 2 hours or something, right, then do something. So we very much believe in a proactively monitor in a way that you are defining the state where things should always be, and you should never, it should never fail, right? And that's, and we also never monitor something. We have a phrase, you never monitor something you can't fix, right? So you don't get alerted, like if you're driving a car and every light on the car means something, right? When you get the fuel light, you go, oh, okay, put more fuel in. When you get the oil light, oh, okay, stop the car, right? Not just a light that means I don't know what I'm supposed to do, right?
Hello, I'm here, yep. Thank you for your talk, and I was waiting to see something about serverless and migrate into this paradigm. It's pretty cool and cost effective.
Yes, you're right.
It's really great, and do you recommend to your customers about doing, hey guys, there is so nice thing like Lambda, go use it.
It was on my, it was on the list of Lambda, yeah. So you know, you're absolutely right. Actually, that's true. There are some real affordances with serverless. I wouldn't say in our case it's allowed us to massively reduce cost, because it does depend a bit on your workload. But certainly, yes. And a lot of the team are very excited by Lambda. My guys have worked with it a lot, but you know, our use case is a little bit more big, beefy sort of base load work, you know, web applications. But certainly, yes, no, you're right. Serverless is giving some, I've heard personal stories from AWS sales people who have told me stories that, you know, this one client used to spend all this money and then they went serverless and it went from like $3,000 to like $10. So yeah, so yes, very true.
Hey Andrew, thank you for your talk. My name is Vitaly. Have you tried using spot instances for your entirely development infrastructure? Yes,
yes, we're doing various things with spot instances. There are challenges. I mean, if you've tried to do it, there are challenges, and there are things you have to understand and be aware of, and there's various ways to deal with that. So in some ways, it was almost like challenging to do that. But yes, we have. And like that's a very valid way of reducing cost. But you've got to be careful, because things about spot instances is yes, they're cheaper, but they're not always available.
Yeah, of course, but if you use it for your development,
sure.
It's fine.
Yeah, and some people use it for their production. Look, absolutely. It's just, you've got to, one of the challenges with all of these new tools is sometimes the complexity of the model to save money becomes the problem itself, right? And that's not, like, yes, you save some money, but you cause yourself these problems, so it's a balancing act. But we do use spot instances, yes, yeah. I should have mentioned that, actually.
Thank you. I've got actually two questions. The first one is, how do you think, when is the perfect time to start thinking about cutting costs for a fast-growing project? And the second one is, for example, we are running multiple projects on AWS, and we're taking them with the project and all kind of things like that. But would it be better, for example, to use sub-accounts and run different projects on these sub-accounts?
So I'll answer the second question first, and then the first question, because I think, so we use a lot of sub-accounts, right? There isn't really a massive downside, and you can link them all together with authentication, and so it seems to be something that the team are happy with, and it does give you a little bit more granularity. So that's what we do, right? So sure. In terms of cost reduction, so you asked about when should we think about reducing costs for a project. Like, I mean, put it this way: if you don't pay any attention to it, it's going to cost more than anyone ever thought. And you may well be having a discussion with some person who walked in the beginning at the project and said, right, how much we need? Oh, it'll cost a wee bit, for some AWS bills, but we've got this stuff going. And they come back and they'll be like, bad words sometimes when they come in and see this AWS bill. They don't call it bill shock for nothing, right? So I would say the sooner you're at least having a proactive discussion about this, the better, right? It doesn't need to be a big one. You might decide that actually we just need to go on. We do this sometimes. We're doing it right now with one of our projects, actually. I'll come and have a talk to me after, so I'll say a few more things. But we do ourselves sometimes go, no, just turn everything on, just get it going, let's just smash this out, we just need to get things going, and we understand it's going to have some cost. But at least think about it, plan it, have some sort of a discussion internally that you know how much it's going to cost, and it's going up, it's going down, or there's a lot you can do that really isn't an impact on the project, right? It's not necessarily about saying we need to half our expenditure. Did that answer your question? Is it? Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I'm Anatoly from QLegend. I'm curious if you have already figured out the way to automate comparative analysis of your AWS spend from month to month, for instance.
Automate the analysis of AWS from month to month?
Yeah, I mean, if there is a way to automate.
Look, we've got a lot of reporting. I mean, there's a lot of reporting, and I mean, you're sort of, in our approach, you're focusing on the big things. You don't need a lot of reporting to say that this month we were spending how much on storage, and the month after it went up considerably, or snapshots. So there's various reporting tools that we have. And a lot of the software as a service offerings will give you that. AWS itself has a lot of reporting tools around that. You can make dashboards. You can do all sorts of stuff. There's just a lot of data, and there's a lot of metrics, and there's a lot of, you need to focus on meaningful, almost business intelligence dashboards that tell you what to do, right? So, I mean, automating these things, there's plenty of sources of us we can ask any question we want about trends or what's happening now and what happened then, and that's sort of the easy bit. The challenging bit is more like, what do we do about it? Did that answer your question? Sorry, I didn't hear it very well.